Good morning. As Brother Jason said, I'm Gavin Roberts, and I work with the student ministry here at Antioch, kind of tag team that with my man Ryan Anderson, and I'm excited to be here with you guys today to open up the Word and spend a little bit of time together in 1 Kings chapter 18. Brother Jason and some of our other pastors on staff have been working through the Sermon on the Mount. We're going to take a little break from that. Jason's going to come back to that today. If you have a Bible, I want you to look at 1 Kings chapter 18. The title for our sermon, the big idea for our sermon today is this: if the Lord is God, follow him. If the Lord is God, follow him. Growing up around here in Central Arkansas, you hear a lot of sayings like this, like you can't straddle the fence. You have to pick a side or get on it. You got to cut bait or fish. One of my favorite comedians of all time is a guy by the name of Jerry Clower. Jerry Clower was an old Mississippi redneck from a place called Route 4, Liberty, Mississippi. And he told stories about coon hunting, fishing, and all things southern part of the world. He was a funny guy, good clean humor. One of my favorite stories of his was a story about fishing, and one of his friends named Claude Ledbetter. The Ledbetter family were Jerry's best friends growing up. And there was this one summer, it was really hot in Route 4, Liberty, Mississippi. Everything was dry, the fish weren't biting, nobody could catch any, except somehow Claude was catching them by the pickup truck load. Claude was the guy you had to go fishing with to catch fish this summer. No one else could catch them. The game warden thought it was kind of funny that Claude could catch them when no one else could catch any fish. So one day he hits Claude up. He wants to go fishing with Claude. Claude says, "Come on, Mr. Game Warden, I'd love to have you come fish with me." Well, they get out in the middle of the lake, and the game warden notices there are no fishing poles, there's no tackle box, there's nothing in the boat with Claude and this game warden. And all of a sudden, Claude opens up his boat box, his bench seat there, and he pulls out a stick of dynamite. He lights up the dynamite, drops it in the water, poof, and the fish come floating up to the top. Claude's paddling around, picking them all up. He's got some great big ones. He's having a good time. And the game warden is irate. He is angry. He's got his ticket book out. He's writing him tickets for this, telling him he's that, how sorry he is. He's a good, no-account loser. And by about that time, Claude lights another stick of dynamite. And the game warden says, "Claude, you can't do this. This is illegal. It's against the law. It's not sporting. You ought to be ashamed of yourself." Claude hands the dynamite to the game warden, and he says, "Mr. Warden, are you going to sit there and argue, or are we going to fish?" Clearly, the game warden decided he thought fishing sounded pretty good. The option was obvious. He had to fish. I think when you think about this story, when you think about 1 Kings 18, you see this idea that you have to make a call. You've got to make some sort of decision. In your life today, if you look at your life, you can live your life in one of two ways. You can live your life for yourself. You can leverage your life to maximize it for everything you want, to maximize it for your own glory, or you can live your life, you can leverage your life for something that is eternal. You can live your life to know Jesus and to make him known. If God has saved you, if you know that you're a sinner and the only way for you to be made right with God is because of what Jesus has done for you, then he has saved you from living for nothing. God doesn't just save us to live for him and we have nothing better to do. He saves us to live for him now. God wants what's best for us, and what's best for us is to live for God, God's way. To love him and to love others. As we study this passage today, I want you to be thinking about this question. If the Lord is God, if you believe that, are you following him? If the Lord is God, are you following him? The Bible is one great big story. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, you see this theme that runs throughout the entire Bible. God creates, man falls, God redeems, and God restores. These first 5 books show us who God is and how he relates to his people. They're the beginning of God's great big redemptive plan, his rescue mission. Joshua continues this redemptive story. It's where God's people go in to take possession of the land, this land that God has promised them. There they are to find rest and blessing. The book of Judges shows us that when they get there, the people quickly stop following the God who saved them, the God who gave them this place of rest. The book of Judges repeats this over and over, and there was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in their own eyes. The book of Ruth is set during the time of Judges, and it's a bright spot in the otherwise dark time. There were at least a few people following the Lord, being faithful to Yahweh, even when it wasn't what all the cool kids were doing. 1st and 2nd Samuel tell us the story of Israel's first human king, Saul. If you read much, you'll see that Saul was not a very good king. But then came David. And the Bible says that he was a man after God's own heart. But even as good as David was, he was not perfect. He was not God. And Israel has some trouble. They, like their king, do not follow God perfectly. Then we come to 1 Kings. 1st and 2nd Kings tell the story of the kings who come after David, the greatest king Israel ever had. It starts off with Solomon, David's son. He does some good things. He is wise, but he loves too many women. He gets himself in trouble and doesn't follow the Lord's commands. And then when Rehoboam comes in, the kingdom of Israel splits into two, the southern kingdom of Judah and the northern kingdom of Israel. This is not good. A lot of not good things go on during this time. So God raises up prophets. These prophets speak for God to the people and call them to be faithful to God. They are spokesmen for God, preachers of sorts, who call God's people back to faithfulness to God and His covenant with them. The main prophet in our story today in the book of 1 Kings is this guy named Elijah. And the king that Elijah is trying to get right is Ahab, the king of the northern kingdom. Ahab is not wearing his WWJD bracelet. Ahab, every time when he was younger, he tried to go to youth camp. He got sent home to his parents for bad behavior before the week was over. He is not overly concerned about being faithful to the God of Israel. Ahab is what we might call a punk. Him and his wife are worshiping the Baals. They are worshiping these false gods, not the real God, not Yahweh, not the God of Israel. And they're taking the people of Israel with them. This is where we find our text today in 1 Kings 18. Remember, if the Lord is God, are you following Him? If you back up and look at 1 Kings 17, we see that Ahab and Elijah's relationship gets off to a rocky start. 1 Kings 17:1 says, Now Elijah the Tishbite of Tishbe in Gilead said to Ahab, As the Lord, the God of Israel lives, before whom I stand, there shall be neither dew nor rain these years, except by my word. A drought is coming. Obviously, Ahab doesn't think much of Elijah's prophecy. No rain is no good for Ahab's kingdom. But this drought prediction comes true. 1 Kings 18:1-2 says this, After many days, the word of the Lord came to Elijah in the 3rd year, saying, Go, show yourself to Ahab, and I will send rain upon the earth. So Elijah went to show himself to Ahab. Now the famine was severe in Samaria. Moving on in this first chapter, looking at verses 2-6, God commands Elijah to go to Ahab, this evil king who does not worship the one true God. And when he does this, God promises to end this terrible drought that they're in. And we meet this guy named Obadiah. Obadiah works for evil King Ahab. But as verse 3 says, unlike the king, Obadiah feared the Lord. He loves the one true God. Verse 3, And Ahab called Obadiah, who was over the household. Now Obadiah feared the Lord greatly. Obadiah is faithful to God, even around unfaithful people. Because of the severe drought in the land, the king and his men head out looking for water and grass for all of their animals. Verses 5 and 6. And Ahab said to Obadiah, Go through the land to all the springs of water and to all the valleys. Perhaps we may find grass and save the horses and mules alive and not lose some of the animals. So they divided the land between them to pass through it. Ahab went in one direction by himself, and Obadiah went in another direction by himself. They're off on a hunt for water. Moving on to the next section, verses 7-16. As Obadiah is out hunting for some food and water for the horses, he runs in to Elijah. Verse 7. And as Obadiah was on the way, behold, Elijah met him. And Obadiah recognized him and fell on his face and said, Is it you, my lord Elijah? And he answered him, It is I. Go, tell your Lord, behold, Elijah is here. Elijah tells Obadiah to go and tell Ahab that he's here. Obadiah says, no shot. No way, Jose. I am not going to do that. The thing is that Ahab has been looking all over the place for Elijah. Remember, they are not best buds. Obadiah knows that if he tells Ahab, his boss, that Elijah is here, and then they come back to find him and they can't, Ahab will kill Obadiah. Obviously, Obadiah has a problem with this. In verse 9, Obadiah says, and he said, how have I sinned that you would give your servant into the hand of Ahab to kill me? In other words, he's like, Elijah, bro, me and you are on the same team. I have feared the Lord, the one true God, since I was an itty bitty tyke, since way back in kindergarten. Please don't send me to certain death. Verse 13. Has it not been told, my Lord, what I did when Jezebel killed the prophets of the Lord, how I hid 100 men of the Lord's prophets by 50s in a cave and fed them with bread and water? And now you say, go tell your Lord, behold, Elijah is here, and he will kill me. Verse 15. And Elijah said, as the Lord of hosts lives, before whom I stand, I will surely show myself to him today. Verse 16. So Obadiah went to meet Ahab and told him, and Ahab went to meet Elijah. Obadiah, he reminds Elijah that when Ahab's mean old wife killed a bunch of God's prophets, he had saved a bunch of them and cared for them. He was reminding Elijah that they are on the same page and asking him not to send him to certain death. Elijah promises Obadiah that he'll be there when he brings evil King Ahab back. So I'm sure with some wet britches, Obadiah goes back to bring evil Ahab back to see Elijah. Looking at verses 17 to 19. Ahab sees his nemesis Elijah and gives him a not so friendly greeting in verse 17. When Ahab saw Elijah, Ahab said to him, is it you troubler of Israel? In other words, Ahab says, good morning, you big meanie. He does not like him. Ahab he believes that Elijah is the one to blame for all of his problems. But Elijah reminds him the reason he has such great trouble is because he is not following God. He is following the Baals. He is worshiping and following, taking the people with him, following the false gods. Verses 18 to 19. And he answered, I have not troubled Israel, but you have, and your father's house, because you have abandoned the commandments of the Lord and followed the Baals. Now therefore send and gather all Israel to me at Mount Carmel, and the 450 prophets of Baal, and the 400 prophets Asherah, who eat at Jezebel's table. So he says, bring all the people and your fake prophets who hang out with your wife. Let's get this deal settled once and for all. Let's figure out who the real deal God is. Then look at what happens at this little shindig, this little get together. Verse 20. So Ahab sent to all the people of Israel and gathered the prophets together at Mount Carmel. And Elijah came near to all the people and said, how long will you go limping between two different opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal, then follow him. And the people did not answer him a word. Everybody shows up to see the showdown, and Elijah gives his speech. He says, how long will you go limping between two different opinions? What he means is, when will you make a decision? When will you stop being so flaky? Make up your mind. If God is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, follow him. You can't have it both ways. Stop straddling the fence. This is are you going to sit here and argue or fish kind of moment. Nobody says anything. Let's look at what happens in verses 22 to 29. Then Elijah said to the people, even I only am left a prophet of the Lord, but Baal's prophets are 450 men. Let 2 bulls be given to us, and let them choose 1 bull for themselves and cut it in pieces and lay it on the wood, but put no fire to it. And I'll prepare the other bull and lay it on the wood and put no fire to it. 24. And you call upon the name of your God, and I will call upon the name of the Lord, and the God who answers by fire, he is God. And all the people answered, it is well spoken. Elijah says, it's me as God's spokesman versus all these clowns, these buffoons who serve Baal, these fake gods. Let's get some bulls from sacrifices, but don't make any fire. Y'all call out to your gods, I'll call out to my God, and we'll see whose God answers. And then we'll all know once and for all who's legit. The people say, sounds good, let's go. Everyone grabbed a Coke and a popcorn. They sit down in their lawn chairs to see what's going to happen. People go live on Facebook. If it were today, it would have been all over THV 11. They'd have been talking about it on Drive Time Sports and Kissin' 96. This is the main event. And guess what happens? Then Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, choose for yourselves one bull and prepare it first. For you are many, and call upon the name of your God, but put no fire to it. And they took the bull that was given to them, and they prepared it and called upon the name of Baal from morning until noon, saying, O Baal, answer us. But there was no voice, and no one answered. And they limped around the altar that they have made. The prophets of Baal are the visiting team. They are up to bat first. They jump around, they do their dances, they chant their chants, they call out to Baal, their God. And what does Baal do? Nothing. He does nothing. So Elijah starts talking trash. If Elijah were around today to play fat man softball, you would want him on your team. He is a trash talking king. Verse 27, and at noon Elijah mocked them, saying, cry aloud, for he is a god. Either he is musing, or he is relieving himself, or he is on a journey, or perhaps he is asleep and must be awakened. He says, scream louder. Maybe your God is in the little girl's room. Maybe he's taken him a Sunday afternoon nap. Maybe he's chilling on a beach somewhere sipping sweet tea. So how do the prophets respond to this trash talk? Verse 28, and they cried aloud and cut themselves after their custom with swords and lances until the blood gushed out upon them. I'm sure these people were ticked. They probably didn't appreciate Elijah's antics. So they start screaming even louder and cutting themselves. They go berserks. And you know what happened next. Verse 29. And as midday passed, they raved on until the time of the offering of the oblation. But there was no voice. No one answered. No one paid attention. Nothing. Nothing happened. Not a thing. Why? Because their gods weren't gods. Now the home team is up to bat. It is Elijah's turn, moving to verses 30 to 40. Elijah says, y'all lean in close. You are not going to want to miss this. Verse 30. Then Elijah said to all the people, come near to me. And all the people came near to him. And he repaired the altar of the Lord that had been thrown down. He rebuilds this altar, then he digs a ditch around it. Then he tells the people to dump water on the wood and the bull. Verse 33. And he said, fill 4 jars with water and pour it on the burnt offering and the wood. When they get done with this, he tells them to do it again. Then he tells them to do it again. The wood is wet, the bull is wet, and the ditch around the altar is full of water. So much so, verse 35 says, the water ran around the altar and filled the trench also with water. Now, if you're in the crowd, you've got to be thinking this guy is a whack job. He is cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. He is Looney Tunes. Who pours water on something that you want to burn? Besides, we are in a drought. I haven't had a bath in 3 weeks. My husband stinks. He looks very silly. Now today, if you give an old redneck something that's wet and he has to burn it, he just throws gas on it. You can burn anything with some diesel and some gas. Might not be safe, but you can get it to burn. I don't know, but I don't think Elijah had any 5-gallon can of gasoline laying around. Now that he has his wood super soaked, Elijah prays in verse 36. O Lord, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known this day that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and that I have done all these things at your word. Answer me, O Lord, answer me, that this people may know that you, O Lord, are God, and that you have turned their hearts back. Next verse. Then the fire of the Lord fell and consumed the burnt offering, and the wood, and the stones, and the dust, and licked up the water that was in the trench. There was no doubt who the real deal God was. Not only did God consume the offering, he sent enough fire to get rid of the rocks and the water to boot. He didn't even need any gas to do it. It was the victory of all victories, the blowout of all blowouts. If it were a sports game and ESPN had been around then, it would be on ESPN Classics top blowouts of all time. It would still be played today. He whipped them. God won. Verse 39. And when all the people saw it, they fell on their faces and said, "The Lord, he is God. The Lord, he is God." There was no question who the real deal was. The Lord was shown to indeed be God. Then the passage ends with Elijah cleaning house. He was kicking tail and taking names. Not only do the people confess that the Lord is God, they act on their belief in the next verse, verse 40. And Elijah said to them, "Seize the prophets of Baal, let not one of them escape." And they seized them. And Elijah brought them down to the brook of Kishon, and he slaughtered them there. Elijah is cleaning up the streets. He is trying to bring his people, Israel, back to faithfulness to God. And not only does God prove that he is God by consuming the offering, look what happens on down in verse 45. And in a little while, the heavens grew black with clouds and wind, and there was a great rain. He sends the rain his people have been waiting for. God won. The drought is over. God shows that he is in control. He is sovereign over all. The Lord is God. Follow him. So what's the point? What does it matter? If the Lord is God, follow him. The people who were there at Mount Carmel that day had no doubt that the Lord was indeed God. There was only one true God, and it was not Baal. Despite what God had done for his people all throughout their history, the people had turned to following other gods. If it weren't for God, there would have been no Israel. On this day, God showed out in a dramatic way, and the people repented. God turned their hearts back to himself, at least for a time. They declared that the Lord is God, and they affirmed their belief by getting rid of the false prophets who worshiped Baal. They realized that the Lord was indeed God, and they should follow him. They could not serve both Baal and God. It was time to quit arguing and fish. So what about you? What about us? If you believe the Lord is God, are you following him? You might laugh and say, "Gavin, we don't have Baals today. We don't worship false gods. We don't dance around and chant and ask God for fire." I would say you are right. But we live for acceptance by other people. We live vicariously through our children. We live for money and love it more than anything else. We live for our lust. We live for sports. We live for ourselves. We live for Baal's false gods, only they're not called Baals. We put our hope and trust in things that are good things. But when they are where our hope is found, when they are where our trust is placed, they become our Baals. Friends are good, but we do not worship friends. Money is good. We all got to eat. Money can be used to do amazing things, but we do not worship money. Working out and taking care of your body is good. Neglecting our body is sin, but we do not worship our looks. In life, there is no shortage of options as to who or what you can serve, as to who or what you will worship. I pray that as you decide, you know you can't straddle the fence. You cannot sit there and argue. Baal, insert your God there, is God, then follow him. But if the Lord is God, and for his people, here is the good news that I am happy to give you today. This is an easy decision. The Lord is God. He really is. When the biblical story gets to its high point, when it gets all the way to the rescuer that's coming, to Jesus, later in the Bible, God shows that he is God. The Lord shows he is God most fully in what we call the gospel. And here's that. All of us who ever have breathed the breath are sinners. We don't do what God would have us to do, but we do what God would have us not to do. You can say it like this: we're really good at being really bad, even when we are little. If you don't believe that, you're welcome to watch my 3-year-old and 19-month-old for a few hours, and you will see they have it mastered. No one had to teach them to bite. No one had to teach them to hit. They know how to sin. We deserve God's if a refusal to do what he commands, or by doing the things that he forbids. But God acceptance the flesh, who lived the perfect life that we couldn't live, to die the death that we deserved, our substitute on the cross. He paid the price for our sin, but he did. We live if he won. God won in 1 Kings 18, and Jesus won at the cross. He did not stay dead. Sin could not defeat him. He won. God always wins. When we believe in him, when we give our lives over to him, we are made right with God. We are saved. When we believe that the Lord is God, then because of what he has done for us that we cannot do for ourselves, because of his grace, we follow him. We live for him. If the Lord is God, follow him. Are you following him? God, I thank you that you call us to follow you. If to live for you, for your glory, God, for your glory and the good of others. God, I pray that today we would realize that you are God, that you are worthy of our lives, that we would follow you in everything that we do. The good news alone. God, I thank you that you love us, even though we don't deserve it. And God, you allow us to live our lives for you and for your glory. Help us to follow you and know that you are God. You're worthy of our lives. In your son's name we pray.